smoke your hog, get out your bib, solid, picking a rib. Out to eat to a barbecue and start picking a rib. And kept on picking. Good for them, good for me and you, so let's start picking too. Old King Cole came out of a hole by picking a rib. Picking, picking, smoked a hog on a red outlaw, called it a barbecue. Say, stomping chicken, we've got a new creation. Say, you better start picking, cause barbecue's taking the nation.
It's time for Pickin' and Flickin' in the Nostril Zone, where I pick a book off my shelf and flick through it. What else could that mean? I'm your host, cartoonist Kyle Bridget, and before we jump into it, please remember to hit like, hit subscribe, be a ding-dong daddy, and ding that bell. Today we're looking at Fearless Fosdick by Capp. This collection was put out by Kitchen Sink in 1990. Now, this book was very influential on me at a formative time in my late teens, early 20s. There's actually a second volume, and it's neat. The holes, the bullet holes are actually perforated in the cover, which is cool. But I don't think this collection is quite as good. It's just, there's better stories in this first collection. And Fearless Fosdick was a comic strip within a comic strip. So in the 1940s, 1950s, there was this comic strip, Lil Abner. It was very popular. And I've got a collection here. This is the Lil Abner, the titular protagonist of the comic strip, Lil Abner. And within Lil Abner, signed by Capp, there was this comic, Fearless Fosdick, which was a parody of another comic strip, Dick Tracy, which was a very popular comic strip as well, which was drawn by Chester Gould. And when Fearless Fosdick would appear within Lil Abner, Capp would sign Lester Gooch. And in fact, the character of Lester Gooch would sometimes appear within the Lil Abner level of the story. Like within the comic, he'd be making the comic within the comic. And, you know, the best sort of Fearless Fosdick stories interweave the comic within the comic with the comic in an interesting way. So, like, the character of Lil Abner, his favorite comic strip was Fearless Fosdick. And so often he'd be rushing to pick up the new newspaper to see what was happening. Or even at one point, he is like hired by the newspaper to basically be the muscle to make sure that Lester Gooch finishes the next day's comic, because he's kind of a nut job and he flies off the handle and misses his deadline. So yeah, they're interwoven in a very clever way. Yeah, and I find this very funny, this comic strip, and a lot of people did. Sometimes you see in like Golden Age comic books, you'll see ads for products with Fearless Fosdick actually in the ad, completely separate from Lil Abner. And in fact, he was licensed by Wild Root Hair Cream, which is like a hair goop product from the 50s, 40s and 50s. And so he'd be on all kinds of ads for that. And there was a Fearless Fosdick TV show with marionettes, I think for like a year. And in fact, this is the character within Lil Abner. I mean, Lil Abner, the comic strip in and of itself, was hugely pervasive in the culture. Like, it's hard to even convey how big this comic strip was. There's nothing like it now, really. Things like the Sadie Hawkins dance come from that. There was comic books. There were cartoons in the 40s. There was a TV show. There was a musical. And so Lil Abner was huge. And, you know, Fearless Fosdick sort of had its own life beyond being a comic within a comic. So, you know, pretty incredible to think about. And so the book, it opens with an introduction explaining, you know, what Fearless Fosdick is within Lil Abner. And we get a setup within the Little Abner strip, Little Abner, the character, he's been hired to keep an eye on Lester Gooch, make sure he gets the strip done on time. And this is how it would have appeared in the newspaper. Fearless Fosdick begins in this space on Monday. And I mean, it's a pretty bold move to be like, okay, we're just going to do a different cartoon strip for a few weeks here. And you can see that Fearless Fosdick here, he's very much playing on Dick Tracy and like the design of Dick Tracy, everything that's kind of exaggerated in Dick Tracy's face, the big jaw, the barrel chest and stuff. It's all sort of double exaggerated here. He's got his girlfriend here, the sort of long-suffering girlfriend. And then, just in every scene, there's people just shooting bullets at him. And he's got these little bullet holes appearing in his, little Dick Tracy hat here. This first story arc, Anyface, it's about this villain who's been, committing crimes and murder, and he's got this malleable face, so he can shift it into any face. He could be anybody. And so Fearless Fosdick, he has a whole bunch of failures trying to figure out who Anyface is. And even at one part, Anyface becomes Bess Backache, Fearless Fosdick's long-suffering girlfriend. They can never quite get to marriage. They've been betrothed for decades, and I like how they sit so far apart on the couch here. It's so overly proper. And but Anyface sort of replaces her for a bit and humiliates Fosdick by marrying him. So he actually marries the villain, and of course, unwittingly marrying your greatest villain when you're supposed to be the world's greatest detective is, of course, like an unbearable shame and humiliation for Fearless Fosdick. And, basically everyone hates him now, and he's like being forced to retire. But he gives it one last go at figuring out who Anyface is, and he has this plan that if he rounds up all of the suspects and puts them in like a hot box, that at the temperature of 500 degrees, Anyface's face will melt. And so that's exactly what he does. He rounds them up, but when the temperature hits 500 degrees, Fearless Fosdick's own face melts. And so it turns out that he's actually Anyface, which of course doesn't make any sense. But that's how it ends, because Lester Gooch, he regains his sanity, and so he can't write any more Fearless Fosdick. It's only a crazy man can. And of course it takes a toll on Lil Abner's sanity. It ends with, "If only someone could explain it to me. Can you?" Okay, so our next arc is The Case of the Poisoned Beans. And in this story, there's a villain who sends a note to the police station saying that he's going to commit the perfect crime. He's going to kill an entire family, and that he's going to get away with it. There's nothing Fearless Fosdick can do. Then, of course, Fearless Fosdick shows up, dual-wielding pistols to catch the guy. But, of course, he does get away with it because he's already dead, and he's just rigged up this recording device. And he's, in fact, poisoned a single can of beans, what's the name here? Old Faithful Beans. And so this one can of poisoned beans is floating around. But Fearless Fosdick's not going to take it laying down, and so he goes around just murdering anybody who's about to open a can of beans, just leaving a total bloodbath in his wake, lest they die from eating the poisoned can. Here's a typical Fearless Fosdick scene. You've got this father here, and he's got his two kids, and he's opening up a can. Fearless Fosdick spots him. The kids are saying, "You've been both a papa and a mama to us, and we love you loads." And Fosdick lifts his automatic here, says, "Just in time," shoots the father right in the head. There's a little cartoon bullet hole right there, and the kids are sobbing, "Why did you kill Papa? He wasn't doing anything bad. He was just opening a can of corn." Fosdick is looking at the can. "Corn? Then the joke's on me. Oh, the boys at the station will certainly rib me about this." And So because everyone who is eating beans is getting murdered by Fearless Fosdick, an underground speakeasy beanery, a speak beanery opens up. And because, people don't want to eat beans openly lest they get murdered by Fearless Fosdick. And they even try to stop Fearless Fosdick from killing everybody by taking away his gun, but he just starts using a bow and arrow to protect people from the beans. And eventually he gets arrested. He gets put on death row. And for his final meal, he gets, of all things, a can of Old Faithful beans, which of course happens to be the poison can. And he fucking dies, man. He fucking dies. He got the poison can. But 24 hours later, Fosdick, he's back at work, and the chief says, "Fosdick, we thought you were dead." And he says, "I was, but it didn't prove fatal. Only a mild case." Of course, since he was officially dead, he'll have to start all over again, and apprentices pay $11.75 per week. And Fearless Fosdick says, "I'm confident I can work my way back to the top, namely $23.45. Fearless Fosdick being perpetually broke and ripped off by the system is a recurring gag. Like in this one, Sydney, the crooked parrot. And Sydney is Fearless Fosdick's own parrot. He starts out as like a loyal pet, but since Fosdick, struggles to feed himself, let alone this bird, Sydney ends up turning to a life of crime and uses his insider knowledge of, police procedures and Fosdick's movements to basically commit a crime wave. And also he makes it his mission to kind of destroy Fosdick's life and career for, never being a great provider. And it gets to the point that Fosdick is completely destitute. He's a hobo. Look at how impossibly skinny he is here. And Sydney's doing all right. He's got this babe on his arm here. And so Fearless Fosdick is so hungry, he's delirious, that when Sydney shows up to basically gloat over how he's destroyed his life, Fosdick thinks he's a chicken and jumps on him and eats him to complete the morality play. And then we have the case of the Atom Bum. And this is a bum who is just awful and committing crimes, but he's irradiated, nuclear irradiated, however you would say that. And so this whole comic is like an escort mission where Fosdick has to, prevent anyone from arresting or interfering with the Atom Bum, lest he explodes and kills everyone. And it wrecks his career, and people think that Fosdick is in cahoots with this bum who's just going around committing crimes and causing mayhem, and Fosdick is murdering people to protect him. And this is wreaking havoc on Lil Abner, who just wants everyone to love Fearless Fosdick like he does. But people are like, but he's helping this awful bum commit all these crimes. Seems like he's a dirtbag too. And Lil Abner just can't believe it. He can't believe it. So Fearless Fosdick takes the Atom Bum to the top of the Washington Monument. He's got the area evacuated. He's going to throw them both off the top of the Washington Monument, sacrifice himself to get rid of this menace without killing everyone. And he throws them off, but when they hit the bottom, the Atom Bum doesn't explode. And he says, I guess that plutonium I was loaded with wore off. So Fearless Fosdick wants to shoot him, but he can't because the bum isn't actively committing a crime. But luckily, he steps on the grass, and there's a "keep off the grass" sign. And Fosdick says, "You walked on the grass. Justice triumphs." Then we have the case of the Chippendale chair. Now I got to imagine that this played some influence on the gangster character of Chairface Chippendale in the Tick comics and cartoon show. This starts with Gooch Sane. This is Lester Gooch here. He's the creator within the Lil Abner comic of Fearless Fosdick. And it turns out that he's been cured of his madness. He's now sane as any other man. And so he of course, can't continue making Fearless Fosdick because that's a comic that can only be made by a crazy man. So the syndicate, the newspaper syndicate, sends in these goons to try to torture Lester Gooch and drive him insane. And eventually they come up with this diabolical method here, which is to tie him up and force him to listen to radio soap operas, which of course would drive anyone insane. So he's able to make the strip, and this time there is this rash of burglaries with just a bloodbath at the scene of the crime. And Fearless Fosdick alone is able to deduce that the crimes are being committed by a Chippendale chair. But of course, no one believes him because how could a chair commit mass murder? And so everyone thinks that Fearless Fosdick has gone crazy, and he tries to, prove to him that the chair is committing the crimes. And you see him here, he's just beating the snot out of this chair, but he only succeeds in convincing everyone that he is, in fact, totally insane, and they haul him off to a mental institution. And here you see the goons are taking the chairs out. The chair, basically says that, Fosdick was beating the stuffing out of him, and he was basically about to confess everything. So Fosdick escapes the sanitarium, and he goes on like a spree to try and catch the chair. He eventually proves his case, and they catch the chair, and the chair gets the chair. The electric chair, that is, folks. And here on the back, there you've got them side by side, Dick Tracy and Fearless Fosdick. And, I really rushed through this. I probably didn't do it justice. I think the best experience of this comic is kind of moment to moment. You got to remember that it's a collection of strips, of daily strips. And so there's like a punchline and a half on every page. And there's just like a laugh a minute, and there's tons of great little details and, compelling, punchy dialogue and great artwork. And, Lil Abner was such a runaway success for a reason, and Fearless Fosdick was part of that reason. And I strongly recommend picking this up if you get the opportunity. I give it 4.5 nostrils. I could see a world where there is a Fearless Fosdick collection that gets 5 nostrils. I like that there's a second volume. I don't think it needs to have as nice a printing. Just in my recent episode, I talked about the Basil Wolverton book, Wolvertoons, that I think Fantagraphics put out, was the same sort of perfect bound situation. I felt like that one really needed to be nicer. This one maybe doesn't need to be quite as nice. It is very readable. This book is one of my favorite books on the shelf. I've read it so many times, and I will never part with this book. So good job, Dennis Kitchen at Kitchen Sink. Thanks for watching. I have a Patreon where you can get early access to all of my videos, including Canonically Crumb. As well, you'll be thanked at the end of the episode. And if you don't care about that, well, then you can just flick off.
Smoke your hog, get out your bed. Solid! Pickin' a rib.